Welcome along to the power of passionate niches. If you look at the radio landscape today, you'll see something fascinating that is happening. Of course, we've still got lots of really big stations, and they're still around, but there's been a shift that has been driven by passion. Audiences are no longer just tuning into what's available, they're actively seeking out music that speaks to them. And that's where niche music stations come in. And we're living in a time of endless choice, and yet the stations that seem to be thriving aren't necessarily the ones that are appealing to everybody, but the ones that are doubling down on a specific passion, a specific vibe, a specific audience. Hyper-focused formats are resonating. And we're here today to talk about that. But here's the question. How do you take a niche concept and turn it into something commercially and creatively successful? How do you build a station that doesn't just exist, but thrives? And that's what we're here to explore. We'll look at the strategy behind these stations, the creativity that fuels them, the business models that make them work. And we've got two brilliant speakers with us today, Jill Hind and Gary Steen. They're each going to bring their own insights to this conversation. Then we'll have a little discussion on the seats, and then we'll open it up for a few questions. If you've got some questions about what we're saying, if you agree, if you disagree, we'd love to hear from you at the end. So to start things off, Jill Hind is going to give us a wider analytical perspective to set the context of this, what's happening with the fragmentation, and talk about the rise of niche formats. So please put your hands together and welcome Jill Hind. Jill, please.
Thanks very much for that, Nick. Let me just try and move over to the next slide. And it works, amazing. Thank you for inviting me here today. From my sort of background, I actually work for a firm of analysts called Enders Analysis, and we write reports about what's happening across the whole media. I'm actually in charge of the broadcasting side of that. So firstly, media fragmentation is hardly new. So consider TV, and back in the day in the UK, there were just a couple of BBC stations. Then after a few years, ITV launched, and then a few years after that, Channel 4. And basically, everyone watched the same programs, and everyone watched it with the rest of their family. Now, that changed as sort of digital television took off, and then you had hundreds of channels. And the major broadcasters did launch new services, but they tended to be pretty broad demographics. So, for example, the BBC launched BBC 3, aimed at 1634s, and it also launched BBC 4, aimed at people a lot older than that. Sky and lots of other companies did launch a plethora of general and more sort of niche services. But you can see over here through this chart that the major public service broadcasters in the UK, they've had about 70% share of all TV viewing since back in 2010 and much more before that, before the launch of digital television. So they've been incredibly resilient. But a lot of broadcasters have actually, a lot of companies have actually launched more niche services targeting and super serving audiences. I've got three examples up here. Firstly is Sky, and Sky have steadily increased the number of sports channels they've had over time. And you can see in the yellow, their audiences, share of audience has been increasing along with that. And why is that? Well, you could argue quite rightly so, their content is pretty unique. In fact, sports viewing across the whole of television has only declined 3% in a decade. Compare that to the rest of TV, which is down by well over a quarter. But two areas that haven't been quite so successful is Sky Cinema in pink here, which has had about 12 or 13 different channels over this period, and MTV in the sort of the light blue. Why haven't they been so successful? Well, think about Sky Cinema. Basically, now you can watch films on anything, not just Sky Cinema. You can watch them on Netflix, Amazon Prime Channels, Disney+, Paramount+, you name it, you can see them. And with MTV, they've had an even harder problem. They've been eaten by the likes of YouTube, so video services YouTube, and of course by music streaming services such as Spotify. And thinking about that, you can now watch a music video on anything. Everyone has a mobile phone. TikTok arguably is now the place for music discovery. So MTV, you could argue, has sort of had problems for many, many years. Sorry, just trying to flick it over to the next one. Now, the rise of the internet and the US tech giants has been absolutely transformational for the TV industry, and not really in a good way. In the UK today, basically half of 1624s don't watch traditional telly in a week. And if you think about it, you've not been able to buy a dumb TV since about 2017, and the replacement of TVs is about 7 years, so it's pretty much gone through. In fact, now in the UK, there are 4 million homes, only 4 million homes, that cannot access IPTV. So along with that comes a huge explosion of choice. And what we can see here on this chart is looking at TV set usage since 2010. And in the dark blue, you've got broadcasters live viewing going down. In the light blue, you've got broadcasters non-live viewing, which is staying about the same. And on the top of that, you've got the sort of the greyish colour up there. And that's TV set usage that Barb, who measures the TV audience in the UK, they can't actually identify. Now, back in 2010, pretty much all of that will be DVD or gaming. Okay? People have still continued to do that, but you can see the percentage of the grey has grown quite considerably. Now, since November 2021, we've actually been able to measure a lot more of that unknown TV set usage. And you can see the yellow is the SVOD usage, so Netflix, etc. And the pink is video sharing platforms. And basically 97% of that is actually YouTube. And what you can see here is that actually it looks like the SVOD services are sort of eating broadcasters. But actually, think about this. This is just on the TV set. If you were to broaden that out to all of the screens, you'll see it's actually YouTube doing that. And even on the TV set, here, if you look at this, the middle column here is looking at 1634 viewing, and you can actually see that YouTube at the top is bigger than any individual channel. Now, of course, YouTube's not really a channel, so it covers so much a wide variety of content. But what's quite instructive is to look at YouTube trending and the top 100 videos there. And basically, YouTube trending is what YouTube is curating to want you to watch on the TV set. And looking at that, we actually looked at 2020 through to 2024, the first 6 months of 2024. And what was really apparent is the length of those videos shown in YouTube trending is increasing. So in fact, last year, over half of them were between 10 and 45 minutes. So that's sort of coming into a TV program. And not only that, if you go deeper down into it, 28% of them last year were between 20 and 45 minutes. A whole TV program, and that's up from just 10% in 2020. So what are the broadcasters doing about it? Well, you've all probably heard of FAST television. It's been talked about especially sort of in the US, and FAST stands for Free Ad-Supported Streaming Services. Now in the US, there are over 2,000 different channels, most of which are incredibly niche. And there's a lot of content players that support them. So for example, Paramount's owned Pluto TV, Samsung TV Plus, Amazon Prime channels, etc. And Fox, which is owned Fox owns Tubi, and Tubi has over 250 channels on its FAST platform, and they account for 2% of all TV viewing. So there's an incredible amount happening over there. But do we think that's going to be the same in Europe? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Across Europe, there is a huge number of very, very strong public service and other free-to-air broadcasters carrying lots of content incredibly relevant to those countries. And these broadcasters can actually launch their own sort of equivalent of FAST platforms through their own owned and operated platforms. So take ITV, which is the largest commercial broadcaster in the UK. ITV has its own FAST channels. I don't know if any of you are English and have watched things like Vera, but you can watch it 24 hours a day on ITVX. Also covers other things such as Midsummer Murders, Towie, comedy, reality, etc. And if you see how successful they're being, just look at here. This is looking at the viewing to the big public service broadcasters players last year, and by the type of viewing you can see. And if you look at ITVX there, you can see the yellow, which is about 6% of viewing, and that's pre-broadcast. That's basically to shows that are about to air on the linear channel, so it's normally when they drop a whole series all at once. But if you look actually to the right, and it's the same picture for all of them, you can see that about half of all viewing through ITVX is to content that's not related to a recent television broadcast. It's basically either things that are like 28 days plus, so it's the old box sets, it's the stuff that they've licensed in, and of course it's their FAST services as well. So in terms of who we think the sort of the most successful video company it is that's actually targeting niches, you're going to be probably surprised to know this, but we think it's actually Netflix. Right? And you say, why on earth Netflix, given its sheer library size and everything is available all at once for whenever you want to watch it? Well, we actually consider how Netflix makes its commissioning and licensing decisions. It thinks of its user base in a different way than every other streamer. It doesn't consider demographics at all. What it does, it creates clusters based on the type of content that users watch and the connections between them. So how does it do that? Well, it tags its entire library with over 36,000 different genre category codes. And they can go from the very, very broad up here through to action to really specific ones like Don't Watch Hungry. And then on top of that, each of those programs is given one of over 3,000 mood tags. It then takes all the usage data from all that programming and uses sort of AI, as you'd expect, to identify the links between groups of contents, creating a similarity map, as you've got here. This map is then used to identify particular clusters of shows, and the viewers are then sorted into those tastes of clusters. It then builds pictures of different niches and what works and what doesn't work, and uses them to influence its commissioning and its licensing policy. So for Netflix, things like viewing history and these niche clusters is a much better predictor of future viewing than anything else out there in the marketplace. So what does this mean for audio? She says, moving it swiftly on. Here we're looking at this chart, we're looking at commercial radio in the UK, just commercial radio, and you can see how much it's lent into digital radio. The light blue at the top is basically listening hours to digital-only commercial stations, and they now account for about 25% of all commercial radio viewing. Now, many of those could be broad stations like History or Virgin Radio, but many of those are niche, based on either particular genres of music, mainly eras as well. Now, in terms of particular genres, obviously we've got things like absolute 80s, absolute 90s, but I'm going to let Gary talk a lot more about individual companies. A lot of these stations are obviously owned by the major two players in Bauer or Global, but there are independent stations out there. So, for example, we've got Fun Kids, which is not surprisingly aimed at kids, and sort of to the opposite extreme, we've got Boom Radio targeting the over 60s. Now, neither of those target markets is particularly attractive to advertisers, as you're all aware, but both companies done incredibly well by super serving those audiences. What I've tried to do here, and what is the definition of niche? Who knows? But I've made it up in my own head. And actually on the pink line there, you can see about half of all this digital-only listening is to services that I would call niche. Now I'm just going to take one company, which is one station, which is a Heart station owned by Global. And over a long period of time, actually Heart's audience has increased through consolidation and buying lots of stations and then merging them all into a Heart. But actually more recently, where you can see the total growth is coming from, is it's from its niche stations, mainly music eras, but also it's more recently had Heart musicals, Heart Love, and it's obviously things like Heart Christmas over that beautiful time of year. And all this incremental listening is not actually, it's adding additional audience, but not at much cost. Now, the BBC is unable to innovate in the same way and can't, due to regulation, launch niche services as often, or in fact it ever has. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing this big sort of decline in BBC and growth of commercial. It's clearly not the only reason, but it is one of those reasons. So what does this all mean? Well, firstly, technology has led to an explosion of choice. Secondly, consumers expect both broad and highly targeted services. And thirdly, many niche stations or programs can actually make one mass audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Really interesting. Many niche stations can make one big audience, and that consolidation point is fascinating and something that we're going to touch on later. I got a load of questions as well about, what was the one? Hungry and Don't Watch Hungry?
Don't Watch Hungry,
okay,
yeah.
A Netflix niche radio station coming to you. Please welcome Gary Steenup, who's Gary's going to talk about Bauer. Come on, Gary. Come on over. And we're going to have a little world view from you, and then we're going to have a little chat about it. Okay.
Yeah, a view from the UK. So it's great to be here in this amazing city. I'm actually very lucky, I will say this at the start, that I've got a family that have lived here for over 25 years. My sister lives in Athens. So I'm actually getting to come to Radio Days, and I'm getting to go out to dinner tonight with her and her partner. And I made the smart move a couple of days ago of texting her and saying, I'm coming over, first time in a while, I'll take you out for dinner, suggested a restaurant. And she said, and I'm going to read the WhatsApp message that came back. She said, but really, Gary, not that a la carte Greek tourist trap. I'll take you somewhere the locals go near the Acropolis. So if anyone wants any restaurant recommendations after tonight, I'm your guy. So tell me up later on, right? So I want to start with, it's interesting seeing Nick's first slide, which is somebody's record collection, possibly yours, Nick, not too sure. But I grew up and I had my own record collection, which was made up of all the passionate music that I liked as a teenager and sort of growing up. Mainly 80s and 90s rock music. Few embarrassing songs in there that I'd never admit to my mates as well. But it was my own personal collection. And when I started my first job in radio, the radio station I started on had lots of specialist shows. I mean, it had a rock show, it had dance shows, even had a country show at the weekend, a religious show at the weekend. So, but that was obviously only 4 hours a week for those audiences. And I suppose over the last sort of 20, 30 years, a lot of that has disappeared from mainstream radio, certainly in the UK, as stations have had to compete, big mainstream stations have had to become a lot more focused and really understand their audience and drive a lot more consistency in terms of their product. So I suppose serving niche audiences for radio is not something that's new. It has been done before. But obviously it kind of went off the radar a bit. Some stations still do it and still do it really well. And I think that DSPs probably did fill the gap. I'm going to say this, but I think radio can curate better than any algorithm can. And I think I think the graphs that you've seen in terms of the growth of UK radio listening, a lot of that is down to the fact that we are tapping into these audiences again. Now, UK sub-brands or niche stations are a massive part of that story in the UK. Absolute Radio was the originator of the UK's massive growth of bespoke specialist radio stations, and it kind of happened by accident. So for those that don't know the story, the station rebranded from Virgin Radio, and Nick was at Virgin Radio back in 2008, and it rebranded on the same day as the global financial crash. Right. Now, what's the first thing that goes when money's tough? The marketing budget. So in the first 6 months, station lost, after the rebrand from Virgin to Absolute, lost half its audience, right? And the team there needed to get some audience back really quickly and at absolutely no cost. So DAB capacity was becoming available in the UK, so they kind of innovated and they bought some space on the national multiplex to create a network. And there was a meeting where they said, what should we launch? And somebody in the room said, what about an 80s station? Because we don't want the main station to be an oldies station, but what about an 80s station? And it happened, and it pretty much exploded from there. Within 6 months, there was a 90s station. Within a year, there was a noughties station, and then a 60s and 70s station as well. So they basically did all the decades. And added in country down the line, which is more recent, and the station has gone from a network from an audience of 1.5 million to a network today of 5.6 million. And that couldn't have happened if the station hadn't launched all these stations. And with so many stations comes the challenge, right? What presenters and what programs do you put on? And that is a lot of breakfast hosts to find. That's a lot of money to pay. That's a lot of management time as well. So what they decided to do was they made a really big decision, and they went with one live breakfast show across every single one of those stations simultaneously. So a single unified show where listeners effectively got to hear that flavor of the station, that flavor of the music, but with the same presenter. And they called it Project, and don't laugh, but this is the name, Project Banana, right? Because it was kind of game-changing technology at the time. It certainly was back then. and it split the songs in real time. So, you pick your era, 80s, 90s, noughties, country, and the show stays live and seamless from a listening point of view. And as the Absolute network grew, so did the choice. So now one show, 9 playlists running across the Dave Berry Breakfast Show and Home Time with Bush and Ritchie. And I think the other point around this is beyond revolutionizing listening in the UK, it's a powerhouse for commercial partners. One show, multiple stations, bigger audiences, so unmatched opportunities for sponsorship and for branded content. And Wix is the client who sponsors the breakfast show on Absolute. It's in its 12th year, and Tesco Mobile has been on Home Time for 7 years. So at that scale, the clients absolutely love. Equally, if you find the right niche, these stations can offer direct access to really highly engaged specific audiences, which brings in new opportunities for advertisers who want to reach that targeted audience through the world of programmatic advertising. And another really amazing example we have in the UK of that is Absolute Radio Country, which country music was not a thing in terms of mainstream radio in the UK maybe 5 years ago. But we spotted an opportunity with a trend emerging, and that station has gone on to ride the wave of that trend, that country music scene in the UK, and is now the station's undisputed #1 country station. In the last 2 years, it's grown its audience, it's doubled its audience to 610,000 weekly reach. And the amazing thing for the network is because they're tapping into a very different musical genre, that audience has been pretty much completely additive. Its success comes in how it mixes that mainstream programming with specialist content to drive credibility. So while we say it does share the same breakfast and drive show, in between that, they have their own specific programming. And unlike US country stations, it's got real breadth to its playlist as well. It's got a nightly show. It's syndicated from the home of country music, the amazing city of Nashville. And that is actually the presenters record bespoke links, so it feels like an Absolute Radio Country original, even though it is a syndicated show from the States as well, which kind of drives the content and it drives the credibility as well. The relationships with the music industry also result in amazing access the station has to performers like Darius Rucker, Brothers Osborne, Carly Pearce, and that's driven in itself amazing, strong digital, social content and pretty much zero-cost marketing as well, because the country fans in the UK are so engaged and it's quite easy to tap into their feeds. It gives country a really big personality of a schedule, and therein lies the opportunity. On one hand, you've got the impersonal nature of maybe algorithmic playlists. On the other, a carefully curated experience of a station like Absolute Country. Now, Balin Leonard is the presenter who presents every weekday morning 10 to 1. He is no one you could meet is more passionate about the genre than Balin is, and I'm going to show a quick brand video of Balin just talking about the station.
This is Absolute Radio Country, where real music matters. The UK's most exciting commercial country music station. Whether at our headquarters in London or across the pond in Nashville, we regularly chat with some of the biggest country music stars on the planet and share their music and stories on air and online. Country music is best experienced live, and we've welcomed some extraordinarily talented musicians through our doors to perform exclusive live sessions. Supporting country music in the UK is also massively important to us.
We work with and support some huge festivals in the UK,
including Country to Country and the Long Road Festival. Real music matters, and we are Absolute Radio Country.
Now, for some niche stations, they're more than just music. They become cultural hubs, and they might explore the history of the genre, social context, and that adds even more depth and value for the listeners. Hits Radio in the UK has been a strong supporter of Pride events across the country, and when they were cancelled due to COVID-19, we launched the UK's first LGBTQ+ pop-up radio station called Hits Radio Pride. We saw instant engagement from sort of streaming numbers we were seeing. And day one on the station, we launched it as a DAB station across the UK. And day one featured Ollie Alexander, who you remember from Eurovision last year. I don't think he finished in the top 10, could have been the bottom 10. Kylie, Mel C, Sam Smith, and we even teamed up, and we wouldn't have done this if it hadn't been, we hadn't had a station called Hits Radio Pride with a local station in Manchester called Reform Radio to commission a mini-series of documentaries around Tough Talks. And the series featured Hussein, a queer Muslim man reliving with his father Azif the day they first discussed his sexuality and what impact it had on his faith. And it was really powerful. And the station was an instant success. It found its place in the Radio and Pride community and now welcomes 340,000 listeners every single week in the UK with the targeted content and proposition. Now, I'm going to take it up another level. This is even more niche and bespoke. Bridget Jones Radio is a pop-up station, right? That was created by Bauer back in January. And this actually came from, in response to a commercial brief that we got in. And the client came to us ahead of the release of the fourth installment of the film franchise. And they didn't just want a standard response. Basically, they wanted a stunt. So part of the brief was showcasing the soundtracks of all the films, which obviously we could do extremely well. And obviously we're not an audio advantage. So we pitched the concept of a month-long pop-up. So it was going to be online, on app, on smart speaker, which only played the songs from the movie alongside the songs that we believed fans of the film franchise would absolutely love. And Magic Radio and Hits Radio were the two stations that got behind this. The presenters from both those brands pop up between the songs to introduce interviews with the stars, remind people to pre-book tickets, give their own kind of little Bridget moments, which is obviously hilarious. And there's no show as such. It's just a massive collection of content, which kind of, thanks to the wonders of RCS technology, our expertly programs appear before all the right songs in all the right places. So whatever time of day you listen, you get a brilliant content, music-rich experience. Now, the client was completely wowed by it because it was such a bespoke answer to their brief, and they loved it. And it was very targeted at the same target for the film, women 30 to 50 as well. And here is how it sounded.
Bridget Jones Radio.
Have you met Miss Jones?
That seems to be about all we've got time for down here in Lewisham. Chief Officer Bevan, thank you very much. Excellent fire station. And now, back to the studio.
You're listening to Bridget Jones Radio.
Yes, love that song, Sister Sledge. We are family on Bridget Jones Radio. It's Fleur East, and I'm enjoying listening to all these amazing songs that are taking me all the way back to the Bridget Jones movies. And we're so excited because the new one is out very, very soon.
Bridget Jones Radio.
So yeah, very niche, but the client absolutely loved it. And, they just wanted something different and they wanted a bespoke solution. And I think that's the world we're in now. We can do stuff like this. Bauer's also been at the forefront of subscription-based radio with premium versions of our stations available right across Europe since we introduced the service a couple of years ago. And whether it's Rock Radio in Norway, Nova in Denmark, RMF in Poland, or Kistry in the UK, you can hear all these stations and more ads break free behind a paywall. And it's been really popular with all the listeners, actually. The most popular it's been is with the listeners we stole from Radio 2 when we brought Ken Bruce across, because we got a lot of notes in from listeners of the BBC saying, we just don't like the commercials. We love the radio station, but we don't like the commercials. So we won't give you the commercials. We'll just give you a paywall instead, and it works quite well. Premiums meant we can really strengthen our relationship with our listeners and offer them even more of us. So we've now got additional radio stations allowing them to spend more time with our brands and minimizing the opportunities for them to retune to a competitor. So we've got stations like Everything Emo, Kiss Afrobeats, Jazz Funk, or stations that allow us just to be topical and seasonal, from Download Festival in the summer to even Christmas carols in the winter. You can go really deep. And it also allows listeners to spend even more time with their favorite presenters and shows. And then Andy Bush, who has hosted an indie disco show since 2013 on Absolute. And this, again, is another interesting kind of way to look at this. He did a 2-hour Saturday night show, which had been a consistent audience winner. Great success in the audience ratings. And we knew we wanted to do a bit more with it. So in 2018, we did a 10-hour version for a bank holiday. and we saw the streaming graphs just go sort of, stratospheric, and set new records, trended on social, did all that. So that's become a regular fixture on bank holidays. And when we were looking for premium options, we thought, can we evolve this further? And can we do something nobody's done before? Can we make a radio station around one presenter and one show? And it was a commercial radio first. So the journey for that show has been 2 hours to 10 hours and now 24 hours a day in terms of, Andy Bush's indie disco. And it's worked brilliantly in the world of premium. And we've got Simon Mayo's album show on there. He's got a station of his own, and Robbie Vincent's Jazz Garden. And all these presenters do is regularly just record content, and then that's dropped into the station, or even recut content from their main programs, some reference tracks, and some more personality moments. And they're regularly, and this is really such a key point today because they are highly curated, our best performing premium radio stations. And it's down to that relationship that audiences have with their favorite broadcasters. And whilst premium builds on the relationships, it also helps us bring in brand new ones by innovating and trialing other possible brand extensions. So our latest station launches we did back in September, Kiss Dance, Kiss Free R&B, and Greatest Hits Radio 60s, all started out on premiums as premium services. And we were looking at it, and they consistently saw strong engagement, some of our best streaming numbers. So in September, they were launched as stations in their own right on DAB across the UK, and in Q4, their opening audience number was over 1.5 million combined, which was really good. Now, I'm going to finish my session today with a bit of an announcement, because it's good to announce something big at Radio Days. So I can tell you here today, before anyone else in the world, we're actually announcing it to Bauer staff at this time in the UK, we're actually going to do it again. So we are, at the end of this month, going to launch 4 new national digital stations in the UK. 2 for our Greatest Hits brand, Greatest Hits Radio 70s and Greatest Hits Radio 80s. There are 2 top performing stations right now on premium. And at the end of this month, we're launching them as full national stations right across the UK. And we're also going to launch 2 other new stations, Hits Radio 90s and Hits Radio Naughties. So they will be launching as well. So I thought we'd just finish with a bit of an announcement. So thank you very much. I'd also like to, just before I go, say a big thanks to David Salt, who put all the slides together today and has been an absolute hero. So thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gary. Come and take a seat. We love a little announcement.
Well, I love a little
which is very good. New radio stations coming.
Saved it for you.
Coming your way. Okay, couple of questions. Jill, is mainstream over? Listening to Gary and kind of looking at the landscape, and every time I turn on my car and the station list gets longer and longer, is mainstream dead?
No, I don't think it is. Mainstream, and you can take that back to TV as well. People still want to have sort of a broad listen or a broad watch. And what they were finding the niche stations do is they're adding to that. They're adding greater content and providing for particular sort of super serving particular audiences. Mainstream isn't dead. It will continue. It will continue on radio. It will continue on TV for the long term.
Is this a bubble? Is this like a fad? We've got the technology. We've got Project Banana, all these kind of things going on, and we're doing it because we can. Is this a little kind of trend that will dip down, and in years to come we'll go, what are we, crazy? We gave Andy Bush his own radio station, or is this here to stay?
I think it's here to stay. I mean, I suppose years ago, and probably many people in the room will remember, was when the whole of internet radio started. Everyone was saying it's going to kill the whole of commercial or the whole of the radio system. It didn't, because it was really hard to find these things. Whereas now, if you've got it from existing broadcasters, you've got the infrastructure, you can be pointing those people. It's playing the curation role, and people will always be looking for a bit of additional information or a bit of additional music to listen to.
What about platform? Quick one on platform. It's interesting hearing the conversation about Rayo and premium and all that. A lot of it in the UK, and I know there's lots of people from across Europe here, a lot of it in the UK was driven by DAB and DAB plus adoption. Will this fragmentation kind of work if you don't have DAB in your country, for example? Is it as good on an app? Or is DAB the key to this?
I think it's much harder without DAB. If you look in the UK, where DAB is very strong, there's no internet station that's successful that doesn't have DAB as a platform. But I think there is a thing that if it's from existing things, it's about curation. You can find them, but I think it's harder without DAB.
Okay. Gary, when you look across your portfolio of all those stations, are there any common characteristics where you can go, yeah, these stations work because ... So
I think it's down to curation and how you build talent into these stations and how clear you are about the audience. Well, there's demand, I think, to be honest, for the station you're launching. I think you've got to know there's demand, and then you've got to think about what you're trying to achieve. And I think if you want to get really high engagement, then it's got to be really well curated.
And you talk about talent. Some of the stations, and I'm not being rude, okay, maybe a little. Some of the stations are like glorified streams with a few IDs. So, but some of them have a whole load of jocks on every show. How do you prioritize where you invest in terms of, we're going to do, like, for example, Magic Soul, very successful station, and that has a lot of presenters on and shows. So talk to me about how you prioritize where you put the money ultimately.
I think you've got to try you've got to understand what you want to do with these radio stations. Okay, so some of these premium stations, you're right, they don't have lots of jocks or presenters on them, but their job is to get people to spend a little bit more time within our ecosystem and within our app. Okay, I think when we're launching full national services on D1 across the UK, then you want to try and make those services. You want to drive reach, but you also want to drive engagement as well. So you've got to think about the talent that you put on there. So I think there's two different things. You just need to know what you want to try and achieve with them.
Is there a case, Jill, for not doing this? If we've got people here from radio groups and they go, that's good, we haven't got any niche stations, maybe we should launch a bunch. What's the argument for not doing it? Just by focusing all your resources on your mainstream station, and that's fine. You know, you don't have to do this, right?
You don't have to do this, but I think you'd be missing a trick if you didn't.
Okay.
If you don't do it, someone else will,
That's it. That's correct.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like that kind of cannibalization argument where I've had conversations with radio stations. They go, oh, well, is it going to eat into our main? Address that one.
I think that's a really important point, I think, Nick, and I think that you have to make sure your investment in your main brand is there, and these main brands are really healthy and in a really strong position, right? Because there's no point in pursuing a strategy like this if you are not focused on your main brands, because that's where you're spending the majority of your money on your talent. That's where your mass audiences are. And I think I said it at the start of the presentation. I think main brands have had to become more focused in their own right. But what we spent the last 6 months, and all our focus has been on our main brands at Bauer and making sure that we can build audiences off these main brands.
How niche can you go? So KISS is a station, and then History launched, and that's very successful as well. In fact, has more listeners now than the main brand. But then I go on my Rayo app and I look. Of course, I'm a Rayo Premium subscriber, and I've got History 80. So it's a niche of arguably a niche. How niche can you go?
Yeah, and there's a country sort of rock thing, and I mean, I think we constantly review all these stations, and we are led by the streaming and the data on those. Okay. So if something is getting no audience, we tend to just sort of try it, switch it off, and move on. But the ones that are on there tend to be on there for a reason. But they're a lot of these stations that you mentioned, there's not a huge amount of investment around them at this stage until you go to that next level if you decide to.
And Jill, how niche is too niche? I mean, we've seen it in television where they can kind of really get down. Do you think are we slicing the pie too thin? And it's the key, you've got to own then all the pieces of those pies. I mean,
it's very difficult to do this unless you've got a whole infrastructure around you.
Okay.
So if you are an independent person coming in trying to launch a niche station, you've got to make sure there's there's a gap in the market, and also there's some sort of commercial market in that gap. And then you're going to have to buy capacity if you don't already have it. Whereas I'm assuming with your stations, your four stations coming up, you're probably carving up existing capacity. So it's expensive, and if you don't have the brand around you, your marketing costs are going to be huge.
And if I was a station owner sitting here, should I launch a sub-brand? So main brand, sub-brand, or should I launch a brand new one with a different name, which is,
I'd go for the sub-brand every time.
You go for the sub-brand every time.
Well, you've got the halo effect of the main brand, and a lot of the legwork is done, and you've got the benefit of it's going to get some marketing free of charge. Yeah.
I could talk about this all day. The time is up. We got time for has anyone got a question? I've got one more question for our fine guests. If anyone has a question, now is yes, we have a question. Excellent.
When you do niche channels, how is it with the music rights?
With the premium service.
No, niche, when you run a DAB station,
Yeah.
that you launch 4 radio stations in the UK.
Okay.
In Denmark, we would have to pay 4 times the same price.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Okay, so no, it's done in the same way as all our other radio stations, and that is basically how much revenue these stations make dictates how much you pay in terms of music rights. So that's the way it works in the UK.
You need to negotiate harder with the music rights, I think, in order to get that. Any more? Yeah, one down there. There's a little microphone as well.
Thank you. This is to Gary.
Yeah.
In terms of looking at the plethora of the sub-brands or extensions, I mean, there are so many of them. I work in the research part of the industry. How much research comes into the play when you're launching those stations?
I think we do a lot of research on the main brands. We really understand the main brand, the parent brand audience. And when we launch a sub-brand like with Greatest Hits and with the hit stations, we are really clear about the type of audience that we're going to target with those. And we've also got to think about as well, we don't want to just cannibalize the main brands as well. So, you've got to have a kind of clever play in terms of, so for example, Greatest Hits is a really good one because we wouldn't do what Absolute have done and Banana Ken Bruce on Greatest Hits 80s because
no one wants to banana Ken Bruce.
It would be a disaster. So yeah, I think a lot of research, but it's usually on the main brand, and we look at that to decide because it's the same audience groups that we're thinking about.
Okay, thanks.
Here is my final question for you. If you could launch a niche station tomorrow yourself, and you can't cheat and say I'd launch one of those that I'd launch. Jill, what would it be? What's your niche station? What's your passionate niche which you would want to hear and tune into every morning for the great music?
So I knew this question was coming up, and I was like trying to ask, oh God, what's this? You've got to come up with some stupid answer.
Yes.
So I was coming down the Acropolis yesterday, and we just got to the bottom, and there was a man playing one of those sort of horns. I'm not quite sure what it's called. And he was playing Radiohead's Creep. Not that well, but he was playing it. It was really discernible. I thought, you've got to have a station that just does that sort of stuff, and you've got to try and choose what the music is.
So weird cover versions is great. I like that. That's a super niche. Gary?
Well, I was going to say I've not given you one.
Yeah, come on, something else.
I've given you 4. I am a huge country music fan.
Okay.
And I think there are more opportunities for country stations, and I think
keeping that close under your hat, aren't you? I think
contemporary country station, I think might be the one I would launch.
Okay, brilliant.
But that's a personal thing because I like that.
Absolutely. Listen, I hope you found that interesting. I absolutely did. Please thank Gary and Jill. It's been great. Thank you, guys. That's it.
Okay, great. Thank you.